So in the early days, shortly after I moved to New York, which was the mid-50s, it was expected in a gay bar that you would be raided by the police. It was taken for granted. So for example, one bar, one of the few that I ever went to, was called the Royale on Spring Street. And it was a mixed bar, meaning there were gay men and lesbians. And it was a dancing bar, and I think you had to have a license for dancing. But anyway, this bar did. So that if the cops ever started to come in, it would look like men and women dancing. But you were expecting to be raided because the cops just did it. And the charge would be disorderly conduct or disturbing the peace or some such nonsense. So on this particular night in 1969, I had friends in from San Francisco, and I wanted to fet them in some way. So we had a little sort of, I don't know, it's too fancy to say cocktail party, but that's sort of what it was, on the roof of my building, which was at 77 Christopher Street. So it was a 5-story building, and the building to the east of us was a 2-story building. So you could see right down into Sheridan Square, where the Stonewall Bar was. You could see right down there. So it was just a nice open space. There was no big building next to us. So we're having this nice party, and there were about 8 or 10 people there. And we suddenly noticed that there was a gathering or a ruckus in Sheridan Square. And there were cops chasing these, seemed like young boys. What they were drag queens. And the cops could not catch them. And the cops were being utterly humiliated. And the police were getting more and more brutal if anybody was in their way. And I personally saw a young couple, heterosexual couple as far as I know, standing there nearby just watching. There were hundreds of people watching, and the cops just knocked them down with their nightsticks. They were just brutal. So we thought, what's going on? But so we turned around and continued chatting among ourselves. And then at one point, somebody noticed that everybody was gone out of Sheridan Square. But that was interesting. What happened to everybody? And then someone else was at the Christopher Street side of the roof and looked over the edge and saw hundreds of people staring up at us. And because of the brutality that we'd seen in the street, we were like, oh my God, what's wrong? And somebody from the street yelled, don't let them in. We thought, oh my God. So then we got hysterical as if we were guilty of something. And we ran into the stairwell to get down in my apartment, but you could hear the cops banging on the street door and ringing all 8 bells of the apartments. There were 8 apartments in the building. All the bells were ringing and the cops were banging on the street door. So I could hardly get my key in my lock. I was like trembling, as if we were guilty of something. We didn't have any idea what was going on in the street. So we got into the apartment, we locked the door. Somebody leaned out the window and somebody yelled up again, don't let them in. So then we heard the cops in the hallway. Somebody must have buzzed them in. And I said, we have nothing to be afraid of. I don't know why we can't open the door. And people grabbed me, put their hands over my mouth until the cops went away. Later on, I found out from people on the street when we went down later that someone had thrown some beer cans at the police from some roof. And somebody erroneously pointed at us and said, there they are. So the cops would have beaten us and asked questions later. And then subsequently, of course, it turned out it was the Stonewall Riots, blah, blah, blah. History turned on the corner. The rationale for this is apocryphal in the sense that only those 12 girls know what the actual moment of incitement was. What we think, but I don't swear to this, was that Judy Garland had died earlier that week, or shortly, a few days before, and these 12 girls were grieving about Judy, and they did not want these fucking cops interrupting their mourning. And they were furious. And so what happened was the cops burst in, the girls got outside and started throwing things at the cops, trapping the cops inside for a while. But then the cops got out and tried to catch them. and they never could. Now, some of these were teenagers, and one of them I knew was a checkout person at the grocery store. That was his or her day job. And I thought if the cops caught them in the days afterwards, they would be dead. So that's my story of the Night of Stonewall. But there was a lot of political activity because the 60s were the anti-war protests, the women's movement, black civil rights. There were all of these movements of pride. This is generally not necessarily gay, but there was pride in being black, being a woman, fighting the Vietnam War. These were all activities at identifying something that was wrong or that in society perhaps, and asking immediately, and what does that have to do with me? And therefore I have to become active, right? In other words, it wasn't just saying what's not working for me, it's not working in society, and how can I help? It didn't stop with what's wrong with me, or why am I not fitting in, or why is society not working for me? But the next immediate question was, and what can I do about it?